today we're just going to run through the visceral organs contained inside the coelomic cavities of the shark. Right? So the coelomic cavity of the shark has been divided into two compartments. The anterior portion or compartment of the coelom contains the heart, and that's the pericardial cavity. Whereas the more posterior one and the more larger compartment of the coelom is called the pleuroperitoneal cavity, containing most of the visceral organs. Let's start with the pericardial cavity. So in general, the coelomic cavities, and this also applies to the cat in mammals, are lined with coelomic membranes that secrete watery or serous fluid that help lubricate the visceral organs so that they won't rub roughly against each other. And the outer coelomic membrane are referred to as the parietal blank. So if you're talking about the outer covering of the pericardial cavity, it's called the parietal pericardium. And there's an inner coelomic membrane lining the visceral organs themselves, and that's called the visceral blank. So if you're referring to the coelomic membrane of the pericardial cavity, the inner one would be the visceral pericardium, and it's the serous membrane closely applied to the heart itself, and it's actually inseparable with heart tissue. So there's a parietal pericardium, the membrane lining the outer wall of the pericardial cavity, and then there's the visceral pericardium closely or actually fused na to the heart itself, and this is the heart. Now there's a structure separating the pericardial cavity from the pleuroperitoneal cavity, and it's this one. So this one is the transverse septum. Now we examine the more numerous contents of the pleuroperitoneal cavity. Most obvious one would be these humongous structures, the liver. Right? And the liver of the shark is divided into the right. This is the right lobe of the liver, and then this would be the left lobe of the liver. And there's also a median lobe of the liver there, smaller than these two lateral lobes. There's a median lobe. And then another prominent structure, but in this case it's covered by the liver, so I'll switch specimen. So this one, dorsal view. This is one of the lobes of the liver. I think this is the right lobe of the liver. And this one, this sac-like organ here, is actually the stomach. In the shark, sometimes referred to as the esophagus stomach, because in the case of the shark, there's no clear boundary between the esophagus and the stomach. So it's either the esophagus stomach or the stomach. But anatomically, Hyman tells us how to differentiate the esophagus from the stomach, and you have to open up and examine the mucosa, the inner wall of this structure. So the stomach apparently has longitudinal folds called rugae, whereas the esophagus contains papillae. That's how you differentiate anatomically the esophagus and the stomach. And then after the stomach is the small intestine. In the shark, the small intestine is divided into two portions. The anteriormost, this one, the thinner one, is called the duodenum. This is the portion of the small intestine where the secretions of the liver and the pancreas are emptied, the duodenum. And as you can see, it enlarges into the structure. This is still part of the small intestine, but it's called the valvular intestine. Because if you open up the valvular intestine, there's a unique structure inside its wall called the spiral valve. So the inner wall of the valvular intestine is actually coiled into a kind of like a spiral staircase. So it's called the spiral valve, and it serves to slow down the passage of digesta and also increases the absorptive surface area. So it's maximizing nutrient absorption. Valvular intestine, spiral valve inside. Okay, and then after the valvular intestine is the colon or large intestine. Down there. That's the colon already. And there's another unique structure in the colon. So this is the colon. And then after the colon, you end up in the cloaca, not the anus. So the shark has a common chamber for its digestive and urinary and reproductive secretions called the cloaca. So after the colon, you end up in the cloacal chamber. And there's a structure in the colon that helps the shark osmoregulate to control or balance the osmolarity of its body fluids, making sure that it's not too salty but not too dilute. And that would be this this structure here, this sausage-like structure. This is the digitiform gland or the rectal gland. And it basically acts as a salt secreting organ. So it secretes excess salt into the colon so that the shark's body fluids will not be too salty. Remember, it lives in seawater. Most sharks live in seawater. And its body fluids are constantly receiving salt from its environment. In order to balance that out, the rectal glands secrete those excess salts into the colon and out, along with the feces and urine ng shark. And what else do we need to? And actually, that's it. Those are the visceral organs located in the pleuroperitoneal and pericardial cavity of the shark. There are also mesenteries, right? Those are the connective tissues that suspend the visceral organs inside their cavities so that they won't just be shaking and being disarranged inside the cavity. No? So they have a fixed position and they are held by mesenteries, but we won't identify them in our wet specimens or our plastinated specimens. You just have to know that there are mesenteries. There are dorsal and ventral mesenteries, depending on their position. So study them. But that's it. Ciao. Oops, I forgot to tell you something. Another vital organ in the pleuroperitoneal cavity. It's actually the ventral lobe of the pancreas. And it's this long structure here is also the pancreas, which empties its secretion into the duodenum. Let me show you the duodenum. This is the pancreas. That tube there is the duodenum. So don't confuse it. This is not the intestine. This is the pancreas, and it's connected to this ventral lobe here. This is the ventral lobe of the pancreas. What about here? So this is the stomach or esophagus stomach, and it's continuous with this. So this must be the duodenum. It's already broken. Okay, duodenum leading to the valvular intestine. But there's a tube-like structure again beside the duodenum. It's actually part of the pancreas. Okay. In our plastinated specimens, their textures look very similar, so be careful. That's the pancreas. This is the duodenum. The duodenum must connect to the stomach, of course.